In a tale as old as time, I was correct. See, a couple of weeks ago, we got the official announcement that the Minato manga one-shot was coming out soon. Specifically, that the Minato one-shot was going to be coming out with the 33rd Shonen Jump publication of this year, which made its release date today, July 16th, at least the day that I'm filming this. But a couple of weeks ago, before I even actually saw that official announcement, I made a hypothesis on what I believed this one-shot would be about. And as I tend to do, absolutely nailed it. In my video, I went over the timelines of how Minato most likely saw a tailed beast bomb during the Second Great Shinobi World War, because as he was a Jonin, by the time that he was 11, he was absolutely old enough to see the Second Great Shinobi World War. And if we consider the fact that it took him 3 years to master the Rasengan, we know in order for him to teach it to Jiraiya after he comes back from teaching the Ame orphans, that the inspiration for the Rasengan in the form of a tailed beast bomb would have to come during the Second Great Shinobi World War. Now, as to whose tailed beast bomb he was gonna see, that was the real question. We knew that the Second Great Shinobi World War was a conflict between the Hidden Leaf, the Hidden Sand, and the Hidden Stone, and obviously the Hidden Rain, which put 4 possible Jinchuriki into the equation: Kushina, Han, Roshi, or the current Jinchuriki of Shikaku. And we got our eventual answer. It actually was 2 separate Jinchuriki simultaneously, as we saw in the first page of the Minato manga, both Han and Roshi using their respective tailed beast bombs, which was interesting because it kind of contradicts some lore that we understand. But that wasn't the only thing in the one-shot that kind of contradicts some of the lore we have. But this one-shot did a lot more than just contradict some of the lore. See, this one-shot takes place in an incredibly pivotal time in the Naruto universe's history. It, in only 50 pages, gave us one of the deepest looks into one of the biggest blank periods in Naruto's history we've ever seen. In those 50 short pages, we were able to better understand how Minato progressed into the powerful shinobi and Hokage he eventually became. We began to understand Kushina's relationship with Kurama better. We began to understand the politics of the Second Great Shinobi World War better. We now have a concrete date for when the Uzumaki massacre happened and why it happened. We have quantifiable AP stats for base Minato at maybe 14 years old that power scale him way higher than anybody hypothesized previously. And what's wilder than that, apparently Kushina might have been stronger than him. There was so much more revealed in this one-shot than just the creation of the Rasengan. Kishimoto was cooking. So today we're gonna talk all things Minato one-shot, what we saw, what we loved, and what you might have missed. But before we get to talking about anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you like me doing deep dives on some of your favorite manga, you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where I talk about all other anime that aren't Naruto or Boruto. And if you just love the idea of me talking about manga and anime in general, you're gonna love my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. But before we get into all that, guys, today we gotta talk about one of our favorite recurring sponsors to the page, Bloodline: Heroes of Lithis. Bloodline is a fantasy RPG mobile game that allows you to build an incredibly unique army tailored to you to defend the world. See, Bloodline allows you to build an army tailored to you by allowing you to mix the bloodlines of different races of heroes, be they elves, demons, demigods, orcs. And while Bloodline already has an incredibly impressive rosters of bloodlines that you can mix together to create new and unique heroes, Bloodline is releasing a new bloodline into the game every fortnight. That's every 2 weeks, with the most recent bloodline that was added being the goat folk stone throwers, who hail from the land of the Dragonborn and are some of the greatest marksmen in history. And this new bloodline can be either acquired through summoning or breeding champions or taking prisoners. And honestly, the idea of adding a new bloodline to this game every 2 weeks is insane, because there's already 1,000 plus hybridizations you can make between the bloodlines in this game, giving you endless possibilities for your lineups and matchmaking. On top of that, this game looks good. This visually stunning 3D graphics for a mobile game, which allows you to appreciate the fact that the hybrids you create not only inherit the skills and attributes of their parents, but also their unique looks, which you can customize even further with purchasable skins. And don't worry, you'll never get bored on this game, because this game offers some of the most rewarding late game PvP I've ever seen, as you can obtain unique uniquely designed hybrid champions by earning points in seasonal guild battles. But this game goes far beyond just battling, as it also allows you to build your own kingdom and economy based off the choices you make. So what are you guys waiting for? Download this game today for free by using the link in my description, or scan the QR code on my screen. Those who use the link in my description will get a starter pack worth $20, filled with 1 summoning crystal, 100,000 gold, and 100 diamonds. And the first 30 people to leave their in-game account and username in the comments below will get a free legendary female orc champion. Yes, that's right, you'll get Ugrel, one of the best champions in the game. So let's get out there and make the army of our dreams. So obvious spoilers ahead here. If you haven't read the Minato manga yet, I'd recommend going to do that before this video, because this video is kind of just a reaction to the manga. It's on Shonen Jump, it's 50 pages. You can finish it in 4 minutes and come back here. But I'd like to open up this video with some non-spoiler content. See, because I hear a lot of people talking about how this is the first chapter of Minato's manga, and unfortunately, that's inaccurate. There's been a lot of talk on TikTok of people being like, oh, this is the first chapter in Minato the previous generations. It's not that. What we just received is something referred to as a one-shot. That's why in the title it's called a one-shot. And what a one-shot is unfortunately one chapter. It's a somewhat short story condensed into something a little bit too long to be considered one chapter, but not long enough to be considered a volume, as a 50th page story would be around 2.5 manga chapters. One-shots are fairly popular. A lot of up-and-coming mangaka actually write one-shots to prove that they can do things like write interesting characters in a short amount of time. And a lot of very popular mangakas will do one-shots for beloved characters that either die off or leave the story. The best example of this in the modern day is Rengoku's one-shot, which tells the story of Rengoku's first mission when he was dispatched to kill the flute demon. Now, this one-shot was obviously released because Rengoku was so massively popular. However, because of the events of Demon Slayer, he's not around anymore. So, unfortunately for us, there won't be a second chapter in Minato's story. We were given this one-shot because Minato obviously won Naruto Top 99. However, this doesn't mean it's the end of Minato content. See, today, and ever since the Minato manga leaked about 3 days ago because it was released in Japan, there has been more positive buzz and goodwill towards the Naruto community than there has been in 5 or 6 years. Sure, every single time that Boruto releases a new chapter, which is monthly, there's a lot of buzz on Twitter and TikTok because the manga is very good, and when the anime has a couple of good fights like Naruto versus Ishiki, once again, the hype train gets rolling a little bit. The amount of hype, love, and excitement revolving around this Minato one-shot manga in both the Naruto community and just the anime community as a whole massively overshadows anything that's ever happened in Boruto, with the upcoming time skip possibly being the only thing that could give it a leg up on this one-shot's hype. And these are the kind of things that are undeniable. Positive hype on social media, downloads on things like Viz Manga and the Shonen Jump app, and physical purchases of the Shonen Jump books. All of these things are metrics that Viz and Shueisha and Kishimoto himself use to monitor how well this is being publicly received. And an incredible public reception means money, and money is really good. To say that in somewhat less simple terms, money is a motivator. See, the Boruto anime is still relatively popular. In fact, it polls in the top 10 in Japan every single week. That's why it's released weekly. It, even though its quality is somewhat lacking at moments, produces enough money to warrant being posted weekly. However, in the face of overwhelming evidence, with Minato not only winning a worldwide popularity contest, but also his one-shot being the most popular thing that Naruto had released since probably the Pain arc, honestly, it's gonna be pretty hard for Kishimoto to not stroke his chin and think,
am I not possibly ignoring a possible gold mine by diving further into Minato's story?
Because you better believe, if I, a person with absolutely no experience in the manga or anime selling world, can come to the conclusion that Minato equals money, you better believe the executives at Viz and Shueisha have also come to that conclusion and are also looking at Kishimoto with dollar signs in their eyeballs. But Kishimoto is a proud man and he deserves that right. And also, the Boruto manga is very good. So am I saying that the Minato manga will just take over for the Boruto manga? No. But Masashi Kishimoto is only 48 years old. I know, isn't that crazy? Mangakas start really young. Oda is also 48 years old. Fun fact. And Akira Toriyama is only 68. You would think he would be older, right? But Akira Toriyama is an incredible example of the fact that mangakas usually work until their 70s. Do they have to? No. Kishimoto is worth more than $200 million. He could have retired after Naruto very comfortably. But he's in it for the love of the game. Obviously, we all know at the beginning of Boruto that Kishimoto handed over the keys to somebody he trusted. Ukyo Kodachi, somebody that Kishimoto worked with very closely on Naruto. However, when Kishimoto decided he didn't like the way that Boruto was going, he retook control. Some people will cite, however, that after Naruto was finished, Kishimoto told his fan base that he needed to rest. And he actually started working on another manga known as Samurai 8, which he planned to be at least 10 volumes long, but it got canceled after a year because there was problems with pacing and editorial oversight, and people didn't like the art. Long story short, it was kind of a flop. And after the announcement of Samurai 8 being canceled, Kishimoto then receded control of Boruto, which may cause some people to say that Kishimoto only stepped back into Boruto because the project he actually wanted to be working on failed. But to me, more proves the fact that Kishimoto wants to be drawing. He wants to be telling stories, and while that story may not have been Boruto when Boruto first started, it now most definitely is. So even though Kishimoto said he wanted rest, which obviously he deserves, we understand that Kishimoto is still young and still wants to be telling stories. But specifically, he wants to be telling sci-fi stories, which is why Boruto's theme has actually switched more in the direction of a science fiction direction, with things like shinobi wear and bullet trains showing up and modernizing the Naruto world. So all in all, we know for a fact that people like Shonen Jump and Viz and Shueisha are gonna want more from Kishimoto. And we also know that he wants to continue telling stories. And we also know now that a Minato story would do very well, with concrete, undeniable, incredibly monetized data. So will there be a second chapter to this one-shot? No, but will this one-shot possibly kick off Minato the previous generations? Maybe. With one day, the story of this one-shot being encapsulated in a longer-running story. Because now that Boruto has reached its time skip, it's probably only going to be around for another 4-5 years max. And while I would love for Kishimoto to sit down at the prime age of 52 and be done drawing for the rest of his life, I just don't see him doing that. Especially when you consider the fact that he had so much passion for creating this Minato one-shot that he made it longer than he anticipated it to be, proving he had passion for the story and enjoyed making it. Cool, that was just enough time for you to blank out watching this video, pull up the Minato manga, and quickly peruse it before we got into the actual review. Because now, we're gonna get into the spoiler territory. With no further ado, let's get into everything you may or may not have seen in the Minato manga. Like I've already stated, in the first page of this manga, I was proven correct. Minato, Jiraiya, and then two kind of no-named Jonin are in supposedly the Hidden Rain, facing up against Han and Roshi. And in this moment, both Han and Roshi, manifesting their perfect Jinchuriki transformations, mind you, are trying to use tailed beast bombs to kill these four. And thus on the first page of this manga, we're shown the moment that the idea of the Rasengan technically is seeded into Minato's brain, as we know that Minato got the idea for a Rasengan from a tailed beast ball. Now coming up against both Han and Roshi simultaneously was a scary enough thought before this manga, because we saw them both after they were brought back through Edo Tensei in the 4th Great Shinobi World War fight at a pretty high level. We know that Han is able to use Kokio's steam release to bolster his taijutsu prowess and create incredibly hot steam that was able to burn Naruto through his KCM-1 cloak. And we know that Roshi is able to use Son Goku's lava release, making both Han and Roshi wielders of Kekkei Genkai. What we didn't know about either of these Jinchuriki, however, is that they had close enough relationships with their tailed beast to be able to manifest complete tailed beast transformations. In fact, it was actually vaguely implied in the manga that Roshi didn't have a connection close enough to Son Goku to undergo this transformation. In chapter 572, Roshi talks about how his relationship with Son wasn't anything like Naruto and Kurama's or Killer Bee's and Gyuki's, which at least implied to us, the reader, that they didn't have a close enough relationship for Roshi to undergo a tailed beast transformation. Because we know undergoing a tailed beast transformation makes you a perfect Jinchuriki, something we thought very few Jinchuriki were capable of ever becoming. But I mean, the Minato manga is canon, so apparently Roshi and Han were perfect Jinchurikis. Just previously, a small amount of evidence prior to this manga coming out pointed us away from that point, which does technically make the Akatsuki killing these two off with relative simplicity even more impressive. Second thing from the first page, Minato is way too old in this manga. Minato dies at 24, mind you. And while he may not necessarily look 24 in this manga, he doesn't look nearly as young as he should be. You could say the same for Kushina, actually. And maybe Kishimoto wanted to make them look older so it seemed more serious, but conservative and accurate summations state that Minato would be anywhere between 11 and 14 when the Second Great Shinobi World War was happening. And the Second Great Shinobi World War is estimated to only have lasted 3 years. However, the Second and Third Great Shinobi World War in the second data book are said to basically have no gap between them, and thus I and a lot of other people estimate that there was only a couple of months between the Second and Third Great Shinobi World Wars, which there kind of has to be for all of the other timelines to make sense. Because, mind you, we know for a fact that after the conclusion of the Second Great Shinobi World War, Jiraiya stays in the Hidden Reign for 3 years. But by the time that he returns, Minato has a Genin team of his own with Kakashi, Rin, and Obito. And at this time, Obito is alive. Kakashi doesn't have Obito's Sharingan. Rin is still kicking it, which means that by the time Jiraiya returns, the Kanami Bridge mission hadn't happened. And the Kanami Bridge mission, while it was crucial at ending the Third Great Shinobi World War, was not the end of the Third Great Shinobi World War. And even after the conclusion of the Third Great Shinobi World War, Minato still has to be Hokage for 2 or 3 years before his death at 24, which means Minato is elected Hokage at somewhere around 21, which means that the Third Great Shinobi World War comes to a close around when Minato is 21, which means if the Second Great Shinobi World War started when Minato was 11, we have 10 years between the beginning of the Second Great Shinobi World War and the end of the Third. And considering the fact that Kakashi knew his father, and his father was able to take him to the Ninja Academy and be like, don't doubt my guy, and we know for a fact that Sakamoto Hatake survived the Second Great Shinobi World War, but didn't fight in the third one, because, you know, and the Kakashi is roughly 6 when Sakamoto takes his own life, but he's around 12 during the Kanami Bridge mission. That means that the Third Great Shinobi World War had to be at least 6 years. It is probably closer to 8. All of this to say that Minato in this manga is anywhere between 11 and 14, and he looks 20. But that's pretty much where my list of annoyances end with this manga. It was all on the first page. Everything after this was incredible. From the first couple of pages, we also learned something new about Minato, that he learned Flying Thunder God before he even started working on Rasengan, as Minato, through the usage of Flying Thunder God, is able to teleport Jiraiya and the 2 other Jonin that are with him away from the tailed beast bombs, at which point all 4 of them return to Konoha. And when Minato and the rest of them return to Konoha, Kushina greets them and asks Minato if they're gonna go do their sealing jutsu practice, which, while technically is kind of a minor thing, is actually really cool, because we knew from the anime and the manga that Minato had been taught in the Uzumaki sealing practices by Kushina, which is why he was able to use the Reaper Death Seal and the 8 trigram seal to seal away Kurama. So seeing why he had mastered these Uzumaki sealing jutsus was kind of awesome. However, instead of training with Kushina in the ways of the Uzumaki sealing jutsus, Minato decides to go train in the Rasengan, because we learn in this manga, Minato is actually trying to create a jutsu for Kushina. See, Minato is actually concerned that Kushina will end up on the battlefield, as he sees other villages using their Jinchuriki to battle at a high level. And thus, since Minato understands that Kushina doesn't have a perfect relationship with Kurama and therefore can't manifest a tailed beast transformation, Minato is trying to create a jutsu that he can teach to Kushina so that she can counteract a tailed beast ball, which has some serious implications about the attack power of a Rasengan, which we'll get to in a second. However, since we are talking about the Rasengan, and that's something we're going to continue to do here probably, it's also important to note that Minato had already mastered one of the hardest jutsus in the Naruto universe, Flying Thunder God, to a point where he could quite literally teleport him and 3 other people a mile away from an explosion like that. But yet, even with the level of ninjutsu mastery and chakra control required to pull off Flying Thunder God at that level, it still took Minato 3 years to master the Rasengan, which is why most people estimated prior to the release of this manga that he learned FTG after the Rasengan, which kind of puts into perspective just how hard it was to learn the Rasengan, which this manga didn't do a really good job explaining. But then again, this manga only had 55 pages. We couldn't do a 2-chapter, 3-chapter synopsis on how difficult it was for Minato to learn this jutsu, because in this manga, we obviously see Minato perfect the Rasengan. However, there's no time lapse or anything displaying that Minato has been working on this jutsu for 3 years. There's just the information that we have from the manga that is how long it took. Instead, what we get in this manga is Minato and Jiraiya actually training together to figure out the Rasengan, which is interesting, because pretty much the only piece of information we had as it pertains to Jiraiya and Minato mastering the Rasengan is from a Naruto non-canon movie, The Lost Tower, where Jiraiya, when he returns from Ame after training with the Ame orphans, pulls up on Minato and shows him that he's mastered the Rasengan in no time at all, which would imply that previous to that moment, Jiraiya probably didn't know that much about the Rasengan. But then again, that is from a non-canon movie, and we're not talking about a canon manga. It was just in the absence of canon information, I tend to use filler. But once again, in the manga, we see Jiraiya and Minato figuring out how to master this Rasengan. And we actually get a lot of really cool moments here, like when Jiraiya tells Minato that the best way to need chakra is by following the pattern of the swirls in your hair, or the whirls in your hair. The verbiage is actually important there. However, the problem with Minato is that he has two separate whirls in two separate directions, meaning that he can't whirl his chakra in one direction based off his hair. Now, the reason this is cool is because Jiraiya imparts the same information to Naruto almost 2 decades later. And speaking of things that Jiraiya did with Minato's son, while Minato is failing to figure out which way to spin his chakra, Jiraiya sits down with a popsicle and splits it, one for him and one for Minato, which causes Minato to realize that since both sides are the same, it doesn't really matter which side he gets, which leads Minato to the conclusion that he shouldn't just be swirling his chakra in one direction, but both directions simultaneously. And this is why the Rasengan is considered the highest level of shape transformation, because spiralizing your chakra in one direction isn't that hard. This is why the first step of practicing to learn the Rasengan is spiralizing water in a water balloon, and why the last step in learning the Rasengan outside of making the Rasengan is popping a rubber ball. See, spinning your chakra round and round and round may be enough to eventually pop a water balloon. You have to learn how to layer your chakra in multiple different directions to make it as destructive as possible to destroy a rubber ball. And after Minato finds out that he has to spin his chakra in both directions simultaneously, he has officially mastered the Rasengan, which is interesting, because this technically means that Minato had mastered the Rasengan while the Second Great Shinobi World War was still going on. We know this because Jiraiya is around. Jiraiya is watching him as he perfects the Rasengan, and Jiraiya disappears for 3 years after the conclusion of the Second Great Shinobi World War, which tells us that the Second Great Shinobi World War is actually longer than 3 years, which goes against, like, everything we know timeline-wise, because for Minato to work on the Rasengan for 3 years and complete it before Jiraiya was gone implies that not only has he been fighting in the Second Great Shinobi World War for 3 years, but also that the Second Great Shinobi World War is not over yet. And this is doubled down by the fact that Tsunade later on in this manga actually heals Minato and is still in the village. And considering the fact that her lover, Dan, dies during the Second Great Shinobi World War, which gives her hemophobia, implies that we're not even actually that deep into the Second Great Shinobi World War when Minato figures out the Rasengan. So who knows, honestly. Outside of Minato, this manga also focuses very heavily on Kushina, who shows off a lot of things that we didn't know Kushina could ever really show off. And about a quarter of the way through the manga, Kushina goes to apologize to Minato while he's training to learn the Rasengan for yelling at him for ditching the sealing technique practice they had planned. However, there's a problem with this. See, we learned in this manga as well that Mito Uzumaki basically was confined to a small section of Konoha for the majority of her life, and that not only are the Uzumaki considered perfect Jinchuriki because of their 8 trigram seal, or the Reaper Death seal, and the adamantite chains, but we also learned that the Uzumakis as a whole were able to make massive seals the size of half of Konoha, and these seals have the ability to increase somebody's ability to contain a tailed beast, and thus Mito and Kushina, after she became the Jinchuriki of Kurama, were confined to these seals, which existed in a section of Konoha and were made even stronger in places like where Kushina and Mito lived, where additional seals were placed on the floors and seals were made in the forms of spiraling staircases. Basically, the more spirals on the ground, the stronger the Jinchuriki's ability to suppress their tailed beast. And thus Kushina kind of lived under wraps, with 2 Anbu members watching her constantly. However, about a quarter of the way through the manga, she decides to use her adamantite chains to seal those 2 Anbu members and run to Minato to apologize. However, leaving that seal gives Kurama enough strength to begin to rebel against her. And as Kurama tries to get Kushina to give in to her hate and make her realize that everybody in her life will eventually abandon her and try to use her, she begins to manifest a version 1 clone. However, Minato, using the Uzumaki sealing techniques that he's learned from Kushina, begins to augment her 8 trigram seal. And mind you, at this point, he is at most 14 years old. And yet he is at a level with his Fu and Jutsu simply by training with Kushina to augment a currently breaking 8 trigram seal to suppress the strongest tailed beast on Earth. And I'm not the only person who's impressed with this. Kurama, while this is going on, compares him to Hashirama, stating he exists amongst the strongest ninjas he's ever known, comparable to the likes of Hashirama Senju, somebody whose strength Kurama knows very well. As you'll remember, Hashirama once punched a Susanoo off of him, which is an insane statement and might power scale Minato higher than we even previously imagined. Like, Kurama is an incredible person to judge how strong Hashirama is. And while interacting with Minato's chakra, he deduced that Minato was in the same league as Hashirama at 14. Wilder than that somehow is while Minato is fighting against Kurama in an emotional chakra-based tug-of-war, Kurama asks, why would somebody as strong as you want anything to do with this lass? I didn't know Kurama was Scottish.
What do you want with this lassie?
But in this verbal tug-of-war, Minato's like, I like people who are strong, which is why I love Kushina, because she's stronger than me. Which, like, I gotta think is like he's talking about emotionally, like the amount of stuff that Kushina has to put up with, i.e. you, the giant nine-tailed fox I'm currently yelling at. But like, who knows? Minato could be revealing to us something that we've been speculating about for a long time, that Kushina, as the wielder of the most chakra the Uzumaki clan had ever seen, while also being the Jinchuriki of Kurama, the strongest tailed beast on Earth, could have been one of the strongest people in Naruto's history. We just don't have a way of knowing. On top of this, we got a lot of perspective into how the Uzumaki seal operates, specifically the 8 trigrams, because when Minato is having a battle against Kurama, Kushina has a flashback to a conversation she had with Mito, where Mito is talking about the Uzumaki clan symbol, the spiral or the whirlpool, which is referred to as an Uzumaki. However, Mito, in the place that she lives, also has a spiral staircase, which is a helix or a Rasen. Now, the true strength of an Uzumaki spiral isn't actually fully expressed until you are able to elevate it into a Rasen through love. But while Mito was explaining the differences between an Uzumaki and a Rasen, it's revealed to us that the Uzumaki clan has been destroyed, which gives us our most accurate ever summation of when the Uzumaki clan was killed off. Because we know at this point that Mito was still alive, and currently still the Jinchuriki of Kurama, which means that Kushina literally just barely missed the Uzumaki clan massacre. Like, the second Kushina was sent off, the Uzumaki were killed, which had always been kind of what we hypothesized. I mean, obviously she was the last Uzumaki, but it is nice to know concretely now. I guess not nice to know we are talking about a massacre, but still. Also during this conversation with Mito, Mito's obviously showing Kushina the Rasen, the rising spiral staircase, at the end of which Mito ends up on her roof. And in a moment that almost made me cry, which is surprising considering the fact that Mito has, oh, I don't know, 3 panels in the manga, Mito tells Kushina how she climbs these stairs to remind herself what fills her vessel. And it's at this point that it's revealed to us that from this roof, she can see the stone carving of Hashirama's face. And it was so sweet, I like teared up reading it. We know nothing about their romance. We barely know anything about Hashirama, but Mito loving him and filling her vessel with Hashirama, it made my heart warm. But also, this moment is incredibly interesting. See, in this moment, Mito was explaining to Kushina how the 8 trigram seal works, and giving context to why Mito was always talking about how Kushina had to balance Kurama's hate with love in her life. While for the entirety of the anime and the manga, we figured this was just her talking about, you know, balancing emotions, it's revealed by this manga that actually filling your life with love, specifically in the form of somebody else, is more practical than it is emotional. You see, because Mito finding love with Hashirama allowed her to put Hashirama within her vessel forever. The vessel being kind of her, but more a trigram seal, which means that Hashirama lives with her forever. I'm trying really hard to not say inside of, but because this should Kurama ever begin to rage and tear apart the 8 trigram seal and try and break out, the love within their vessel in the form of Hashirama or Minato would be able to battle against Kurama. And while this might just seem like an interesting add-on to the story to explain how the 8 trigram seal works better, it's actually more interesting than even that. See, this brief 2-page explanation explains why Kushina was in Naruto's seal. See, what many write off as plot no jutsu or a plot hole, with Kushina showing up during the pain arc to refix the 8 trigram seal, which was destroyed by Kurama, is now perfectly explained with background information that ties into the manga. The 8 trigram seal isn't technically complete until the person it's placed on finds love. And since Naruto's 8 trigram seal was placed on him by his mother, who loved him, she was able to impart her chakra into that seal, being there should Kurama ever rage against Naruto. So obviously this is a cool explanation that builds on the foundation of Minato and Kushina's relationship. It also explains one of the most crucial and now misunderstood moments in all of Naruto. And since Kushina loved Minato, Minato was within her 8 trigram seal, so Minato had to battle against Kurama, who's currently trying to take over Kushina and had formed a version 2 Jinchuriki cloak that Kushina used to punch a hole in Minato's chest, mind you. However, the hole in Minato's chest isn't what's important here, because Minato this entire time is holding his Fuin Jutsu on Kushina's chest, trying to augment the 8 trigram seal in order to reseal Kurama, but because of that, he technically has direct connection to her seal. Allows him to enter her seal, and therefore battle against Kurama. And thus we're served to the final fight in this one-shot, Minato versus Kurama, with Minato using his now perfected supposed counter to tailed beast balls that he created for Kushina so that she could have a viable defense against other Jinchuriki. However, that's not the way it played out, because Minato just decided to be the one doing the defending, and therefore Minato decided to use this new perfected jutsu to shove a tailed beast ball back into Kurama's mouth. Essentially, Minato, while battling against Kurama in the seal, nullified a tailed beast ball from a full Kurama with a base Rasengan, which can be perceived one of two ways. The first way is that Minato's scaling is now absolutely insane. A tail beast ball from Kurama is pretty much the strongest attack in the universe. It's within the top 5. The only thing stronger would be things like Kaguya's dimension shifting ability, Juneri's ability to cut the moon in half, maybe some Tensegan and Rinnegan abilities. So it's definitely up there as the most destructive thing in the Naruto universe. It's easily a city level attack. And obviously Naruto has augmented these tailed beast balls into things like a tailed beast ball Rasen Shuriken and so on and so forth to make it even more destructive. We are talking about a tailed beast ball in its purest form from the entirety of Kurama's chakra. Important distinction there. Which would mean, since Minato was able to nullify this attack with an attack of his own, his Rasengan is city level. That's base Rasengan a day into learning it as a 14-year-old, which is a lot. But if we do think about it like that, that does raise a couple of really important questions. If he was that strong, not in his prime, and alive, why wasn't the Edo version of himself that was able to use Sage Mode and KCM2 at least that strong? And city level AP is kind of where people place Edo Minato with KCM and Sage Mode. So if he was already able to do that without Sage Mode, KCM, and one day into learning Rasengan, what's going on here? Now, there's a couple of ways you could explain that away. You could say that his Edo form wasn't as strong as he was when he was alive, which lines up with the fact that Kurama already compared him to Hashirama at 14 years old, and we know for a fact that Hashirama was definitely not brought back in the prime of his life, but it doesn't make a ton of sense because Minato died when he was 24. He was in the prime of his life when he died. So there is another possible explanation, and it's not,
Oh, well, he was battling within a seal. Those feats aren't real.
absolutely those feats are real. Kurama is just chakra. Whether he's in a seal or in the real world, it makes no difference. A large amount of feats that we use to scale Naruto without Kurama in his Sage Mode, or when he battled against Kurama in his seal in Sage Mode. So if we're saying that the feats in this seal don't mean anything, then we're saying those feats don't mean anything, and then there goes Naruto scaling. The second way to explain this is that Kurama was currently bound with adamantite chains. The adamantite chains that Kushina uses to keep Kurama in the seal. Now, while technically in the manga and just the manga, adamantite seals are just really good at holding things, in the anime it was stated that adamantite chains were the greatest Fuinjutsu known to man, not only because they were incredible at holding things, but also because anything held by adamantite chains has its chakra suppressed. And therefore, not only are you not strong enough to break out of these chains usually, you now no longer have access to your chakra. It works a bit like Kurapika's chain that forces the person wrapped in it into Zetsu, or the way that the god deity gates that Hashirama uses pacify anybody they land on. And therefore, since Kurama was having his chakra suppressed by said adamantite chains, any tail beast ball he would have been able to use would be substantially weaker than a standard tail beast ball. And considering the fact that this was Kushina using the adamantite chains, who was said to have the greatest usage of adamantite chains in history, with the data book saying that Karin's adamantite chains that she used in the 4th grade Shinobi World War were a mere glimpse of what Kushina was able to accomplish, it's safe to assume, if we're going with the route that adamantite chains suppress chakra, that Kurama was nowhere near his full power. Genuinely, I can't say which way is correct. I usually err on the side that filler information that doesn't go against the information given in the manga should be treated as canon, but at the same time, watching power scalers frantically try and figure out just how strong Minato is because they said that Itachi beats him in a one-on-one is kind of fun. Listen, the Yata mirror only reflects elemental releases. You telling me it's gonna block a city level Rasengan? We actually don't know if it only blocks elemental releases. It just says that it's able to block any spiritual or physical attack. But if we think that it works in the same way as Yagura's ice mirrors, it has to match the elemental release being used to attack it in order to nullify it. And at least Minato's Rasengan doesn't have an elemental release. It's just chakra. But you guys are smarter than me. I'll let you figure out how strong Minato is by just having an opinion on whether or not you want to believe filler. And after Minato decides that his ball is stronger than Kurama's, there's a really cute moment between Minato and Kushina, where Kushina remarks that this must be the jutsu that he's working on, and he confirms, and then he tells her his incredibly stupid name for the Rasengan, which is like ice popsicle swirl whirl Jiraiya inspired ball of chakra. Something like that. Honestly, that might be it. However, after taking Minato to the place that Mito had brought her, Kushina says that the jutsu will be known as the Rasengan, which is actually really cool because we never knew that Kushina was the one who named it. But considering the fact that the jutsu was made for her specifically so she could learn it and protect herself, it seems appropriate that it's known as the Rasengan. And with that, that was the ending of the one-shot. A story that in 55 pages managed to not only tell us the story of how Minato created the Rasengan, but also give us more depth in the relationship between Minato and Kushina. Show us how the 8 trigram seal can be augmented. Show us the new powers of Minato, while all the while explaining what many deemed as a massive plot hole in the story. For all intents and purposes, outside of the fact that Minato looked 20 while supposedly needing to be around 14 years old, it was perfect. And considering the fact that my hypothesis was correct on what the plot of this story would be, I'm also hoping that my hypothesis that there's more of this coming is also accurate. But what did you guys think? Did you enjoy the story? Is there anything that I brought up that you missed? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Listen, we can just keep doing Naruto Top 99 every month, and, we'll just keep making sure Minato wins, and then, you win, I win, we all win.